Hi, my name is Gretchen Becherer, and this is for my seminar and storytelling class for San Jose State University. It's called The Velveteen Rabbit, and it's intended for a family audience. This is The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjerie Williams. Once there was a Velveteen Rabbit, and in the beginning he was really splendid. He was fat and bunchy as a rabbit should be. He had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with a pink sateen. On Christmas morning, wedged in the top of the boy's stocking, with a little sprig of holly between his front paws, the effect was really charming. The boy loved him for at least 2 hours. And then aunts and uncles came to supper, and amidst a great rustling of tissue paper and all the excitement of opening presents and parcels, the little rabbit was forgotten. He spent most of his time on the nursery floor or in the toy cupboard. And being made of only velveteen, he was naturally quite shy, and the more expensive toys really snubbed him. He knew not what he was modeled after, for he didn't understand that there were real rabbits. He thought all rabbits were stuffed with sawdust like him, but he also understood that sawdust was quite out of date and never spoken of in modern circles. And after a while, the little rabbit was meant to feel very common and insignificant. And the only person who was ever kind to him in the whole nursery was the wise old skin horse. The old skin horse was so old, his fur was bald in patches. You could see the seams underneath. And the hairs of his tail, most of them had been pulled out to string bead necklaces. But he was very wise, for he'd seen a long succession of toys come through the nursery. Expensive toys, only to break their mainsprings and pass away, never to turn into anything else. The wise old skin horse, he knew about nursery magic, which is a very strange and wonderful thing. "What is real?" asked the little rabbit one morning as they lay side by side in the nursery. "Is it when you have something that buzzes inside you and a stick-out handle?" "Real isn't how you are made," said the skin horse. "Real is something that happens when a child loves you. Not just as a toy to play with, but really loves you. That's when you become real." "Does it hurt?" said the little rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always very truthful. "But you don't mind being hurt when you are real." "Is it happen all at once, like being wound up, or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It generally takes a very long time, and you grow to look quite shabby, with your fur being rubbed off, your eyes falling out, becoming very loose in the joints. But you don't mind because you are real, and the only people who think you are ugly are those who don't understand real." "And I suppose you are real?" said the little rabbit. And then he wished he hadn't said that, for he didn't know if the skin horse was sensitive. The skin horse only smiled and said, "The boy's uncle made me real a great many years ago. And once you become real, you can't become unreal. It lasts for always." Ah, the little rabbit sighed. He longed to become real, although the thought of losing his fur and his whiskers and his eyes was rather sad. The person who ruled the nursery was called Nana. And one night when the little boy was going to bed, he couldn't find the china dog that always slept with him. Nana was busy and couldn't be troubled to hunt for china dogs at bedtime. "Here," she said, "your old bunny will do." She pulled the bunny out with one ear and handed him to the boy. And from that night on, the little boy slept with the Velveteen Rabbit in his bed. And at first the Velveteen Rabbit found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy would hug him very tight, so tight he could scarcely breathe. But the little boy would make nice tunnels for him under the bedclothes and tell him about real rabbits that lived in burrows. And soon the little rabbit began to like it, and he grew quite accustomed to snuggling up under the little boy's warm chin at night, and as the little boy would drop off to sleep, the rabbit would dream too. Spring came, and wherever the little boy went, the rabbit went. One day, when the little boy was suddenly called off to tea, well, the rabbit was left out on the lawn till well after dusk, and Nana had to come out with candles to find him. "Here's your old bunny," she said as she came in. "Fancy all that fuss for a toy." The little boy stretched out his arms. He said, "Give me my bunny. You mustn't say that. He's real. He's not a toy. He's real." And when the little rabbit heard that, a funny tickly feeling came over him, and he was so happy. The little boy said it. The nursery magic had happened. He had become real. The little boy had said it himself. The little rabbit was so happy, he hardly noticed that his fur was starting to get rubbed off. His tail had become unsewn, and the pink on his nose had all rubbed off from where the little boy always kissed him. One day the little boy had the little bunny out behind the woods in his house, and as the little rabbit sat in the lawn watching the little ants go to and fro between his paws, two strange creatures crept out of the bracken staring at him, and they were two rabbits. The little rabbit stared back. He thought, "These are very strange, brand new, well-made creatures." He could hardly see the seams where they'd been sewn or the clockwork inside, and they moved in a very queer way, different from him. Long and thin one minute, and fat and bunchy the next. And the little wild rabbits stared at him, their noses twitching, and one said, "Why don't you get up and play with us?" And the Velveteen Rabbit said, I don't want to. For he didn't want them to see that he didn't have the clockwork inside of him that they did. And the one who spoke crept very closely to the Velveteen Rabbit, so close that the wild rabbit's whiskers touched the Velveteen Rabbit's pink sateen ears. And then he crinkled up his nose and flattened his ears and jumped back. He said, "He smells funny. He's not a rabbit at all. He's not real." And the little Velveteen Rabbit said, "I am real, I am." The little boy said it himself, "I am real." And just at that moment, the little boy ran past them on the grass behind, and with a flash of white of their little cotton tails, the two wild rabbits jumped away. And the little Velveteen Rabbit was left all alone, feeling quite sad. Well, the little boy gathered him in his arms and took him home. And the little Velveteen Rabbit, he was happy once again, so happy that he hardly noticed that most of his fur was being worn away from all the hugging and loving. And he was growing to look quite shabby, and the pink sateen on his ears had grown gray, and much of his whiskers had fallen out. He hardly looked like a rabbit at all. But the little boy thought he was the most beautiful rabbit in the world, for he loved him. And the little Velveteen Rabbit knew it and felt real. Then one day the boy got ill, very ill, with a very bad fever. He was so hot when he would hug the little rabbit felt burning. Strange people would come and go from the nursery, and the lights would stay on all night, and the little Velveteen Rabbit lay very still, for he didn't want anyone to notice him there and possibly take him away when the little boy needed him the most. And he would creep up to the little boy at night while he was half asleep, in and out of sleeping, and whisper his beautiful plans he had for him and the little boy when the little boy got better. And the little boy did get better. And as they were cleaning and disinfecting the nursery, Nana came across the Velveteen Rabbit one day and said to the doctor, "What do I do with this old bunny?" And the doctor said, "What, that? It's a mess of scarlet fever germs. Put it in the rubbish pile and burn it. He can't have that anymore. He needs a new rabbit." And the little rabbit was put in the rubbish bag with a bunch of books and toys and thrown out behind the fowl house to be burned. And he was very sad. And as the little boy lay sleeping that night with plans of going to the seaside the next day, the little rabbit laid in the rubbish bag, and the top had been left open, and so he had just enough room to wiggle his head out and look around, and he was very cold, for the little boy had hugged him so much he hardly had any coat left to keep him warm. And he was very uncomfortable, for he'd grown quite used to sleeping in a real bed. And he looked at the woods and the bracken behind him, and with all the memories that he'd had of the little boy, and thought, if this is what the old skin horse meant by becoming real, if this is what it comes to in all this pain, and remembering all these beautiful memories, one more beautiful than the next, he thought, what use is it to become real? this is a horrible way to end. And he was so sad. A real tear came down his cheek and off his little shabby nose and touched the ground. And right when the teardrop touched the ground, a beautiful, mysterious flower started to bloom, the most beautiful flower the rabbit had ever seen. And out of the blossom of the flower, a beautiful fairy stepped out. And he was so surprised and amazed, he forgot he was crying and just laid there and looked at this fairy. And the fairy said to him, "Little rabbit, don't you know who I am? I am the nursery magic fairy. I come for all the toys that the children have loved, and they've outgrown the toys and worn them out, and I'm here to make them real." And she gathered him up in her arms and kissed him and flew with him through the black velvety night into the land where all the little wild rabbits were dancing. And the wild rabbits saw them coming, and they gathered in a circle right where the fairy landed. And they all watched her, and she set the little rabbit down in the grass and said, "Rabbits, I've brought you a new playmate to play with forever and ever. You need to teach him the ways of Rabbitland and take very good care of him. Now run away, little rabbit, dance and play." And the little rabbit, he looked all around. He didn't dare dance and play, for he didn't want the other rabbits to see he didn't have any hind legs. What he didn't realize was when the fairy kissed him, she made him into a real rabbit. And he just sat there very still till suddenly he realized he had hind legs, and he danced and jumped and whirled away, so happy, so joyful that he didn't even realize the fairy had disappeared. Seasons passed, and one day the little boy went out to the woods behind his house, and he was playing, and out of the bracken crawled two wild little rabbits. And they looked at the little boy, and he saw them. And the little boy looked at one of the rabbits and noticed that he had brown and white spots in his fur. And around the black nose of the little rabbit and his hot eyes, there was a familiarity, and he thought to himself, "Why, that looks just like the little rabbit I lost when I had scarlet fever." And little did he know, that was the little Velveteen rabbit come back to see the boy who had once made him real. The end.